Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit this afternoon about the extreme right and their long history on the internet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that history. And then I want to talk about what precisely they're doing online today. In particular, I want to talk to you about the kind of linguistic, visual, numeric, and other codes that they use to identify each other and to build community and for other purposes online and increasingly in social media. And then just also quite briefly, let me say a few words about gender. So both the sort of hyper-masculine nature, which I think you're going to see emerging when I show you some of these visuals and whatnot, but also an increasing role of women in extreme right-wing spaces, just like there's an increasing role of women in violent jihadi cyberspaces. Let me first, though, really briefly say something about what I mean when I say extreme right, so what their ideology is, and also just a few words about its contemporary relevance. So when we talk about extreme right ideology, it's something that's quite diffuse. So there are a lot of different groups who believe a lot of different things. But what many of them, not all of them, but many of them have in common is this core sort of ideology that aims at making fundamental changes to democratic systems on the basis of what you might term supremacism. So a core concept in extreme right ideology is this concept of supremacism. In other words, the belief that certain people who share a given race, a given culture, a given religion, etc., are superior to all other people. And most often, and what we're going to see in a few minutes, is we're talking about white supremacism. So what many of these people share then is also a commitment to racism, to authoritarian government or authoritarianism. They're generally xenophobes, obviously. Almost all of them are Islamophobes. Some of them are anti-Semites. Some of them are pro-Israel. It gets kind of complicated. And almost all of them have very serious hostility to immigration. So people, whether refugees or migrants or what have you, traveling inward to their communities as they see them. In terms of their contemporary relevance, well, I think most of us have seen around us from media and whatnot that there is a rise of the right. So they have been quite successful recently in Europe in terms of elections, so winning seats in local governments and national governments, and we can see regionally an increase in their power and also in other parts of the world. In general, it has to be said that they are less associated with terrorism than, for example, the jihadis. So everybody's aware of the violent jihadis and their engagement in terrorism over the last number of years, and especially over the summer here in Europe. But terrorism is not wholly unknown on the part of the extreme right either, and there have been a number of sort of terrorist spectaculars associated with them over the years also. Two well-known large attacks carried out by individuals associated with the extreme right were the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, so in the United States, which killed 168 people. And of course, closer to home, Anders Breivik's attacks in Oslo and in Utoya in 2011, in which 77 people died. Like I say, terrorism isn't unheard of within extreme right-wing circles, but what's more commonplace are sort of more everyday, if you like, hate crimes and attacks carried out by the extreme right. And these are increasing all over Europe and elsewhere, the United States and elsewhere, at the present time. And in particular, the extreme right have sought to exploit the refugee crisis and the migration crisis that's ongoing at the present time. And the kind of attacks that they've carried out range from sort of arson and bomb attacks and what have you to, like I say, individual hate crimes, so attacks on just individual people who they believe sort of look different or different in some way to themselves. And the German Interior Ministry reported relatively recently on the 2015 figures for attacks on refugee shelters in Germany. And they showed that there were 800 attacks in 2015 versus approximately 198 attacks in 2014. So you can see the way in which these kinds of attacks have shot up in a very short period of time. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that the internet is causing these kind of attacks, but there has been a major focus online in extreme right-wing circles on the migration crisis, and they're really seeking to whip people up around this particular issue in 2014, 2015, and right up to the present time. Which is not to say, of course, that the extreme right are new to the internet and this is something new that they're doing. This is something new that they've glommed onto in terms of a cause, but they have a very long history on the internet. And I think it's interesting because one of the things that you might begin to believe from media in particular is that, yes, the so-called Islamic State or violent jihadis, if you like, were the first people to kind of use the internet for violent extremist purposes and to get out the word about their violent politics. But actually nothing could be further from the truth. A whole range of groups over the last 20 or even 30 years or so have sought to employ the internet to broadcast about their violent politics. And in fact, some of the earliest adopters of the internet, full stop, were the extreme right. So they were really the very first people to do politics, any politics, on the internet. And it wasn't on the web as we know it today. It was way back in the early 1980s. They began to use bulletin board systems in order to get the word out. And this was in the US. So the guy that wrote this inter-clan newsletter that you see on the screen, his name is Louis Beam. And he's a very well-known figure in the KKK, so the Ku Klux Klan, and also another very extreme right organization called the Aryan Nations. And he was one of the first people in this extreme right milieu in the US who began touting the use of computers and IT and these bulletin board systems as far back as 1983, 84, 85, when these systems first began to be used by the extreme right. And at around the same time, these systems also began to be used in Germany for similar purposes. What did they use them for? Well, actually, for many of the same reasons that the extreme right uses the internet at the present time. So to solicit and distribute hate messages, to provide the names, addresses, and other details of people who they viewed as their enemies. Also, to put people in contact who shared a commitment to this violent ideology. And also to mobilize people in the real world. So even then, they weren't just restricting things to telephony or sort of the online space, as it were, but they also would post dates and locations about events, whether concerts or other types of gatherings that were being held by neo-Nazis and others, so for mobilization purposes. There is a shift over time, obviously, as we know, from these bulletin board systems and other early innovations in terms of the internet. On the part of the extreme right, the shift went from websites to forums. And there's a forum that is still in existence, but that also has a long history. It's still prominent today, and it's called Stormfront. It was founded by a guy called Don Black in Florida in the mid-1990s, about 1995 or thereabouts. It's often described as the first white nationalist site on the internet. That's how they describe themselves, and others describe them similarly. It's interesting for our purposes for a number of reasons. One, it's got a great many posts. So it has about nearly 12 million posts at the present time. It has approximately 314 signed up members at the present time also. That's up about 10,000 from this time last year. And like I say, for our purposes, it's interesting for a number of reasons, but one of them is it's not restricted, of course, to people posting or being involved from the United States. So it's the internet, obviously, anybody can involve themselves, and indeed they do. And there are many European subforums on Stormfront. So, for example, there's a Europe subforum, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands and Flanders, Hungary, etc. etc. There's also a subforum for teens and another for women, the so-called ladies-only subforum. At the time of his attacks, in fact, Anders Breivik had been a member of Stormfront for about 3 years. However, Stormfront isn't really the place any longer where you find the kind of most offensive or the most racist internet content. So in terms of really extreme right-wing content at the present time, it's found on sites like Reddit and also 4chan. And in fact, this became an issue for, in particular, Reddit in 2015. Reddit had a number of so-called subreddits that had some really quite extraordinarily offensive racist content on it. One of them in particular, called Coontown, came to be very well known for this content. It had hundreds and thousands of posts on it, and Reddit came under pressure due to the nature of a lot of these postings, and they eventually chucked this subreddit off their particular platform, although it is still present on the internet on another platform. One of the other things that Reddit did at around the same time was to make some of these other similar subreddits private. So they quarantined these. So you have to be a signed up member of Reddit now and signed up to the subreddit in order to involve yourselves in these, whereas previously anybody could go online and view them. It's still relatively easy, obviously, to see this content if you wish to, but you must now be a signed up member. I'm not going to show any of this content because really it is extraordinarily offensive. What I'm going to talk about instead is I'm going to look at the linguistic, the visual and the numerical codes that you see used by people in extreme right-wing circles, excuse me, particularly on other social media sites. So, in terms of these linguistic and visual codes, well, I would say there are 3 basic types. There are color codes, there are sort of visual codes, and there are linguistic and numerical codes. And the color code is easy. A lot of the colors are red, black, and white. These are obviously the colors associated with Nazism, and you see them very often used at the present time. On the screen right now is an image associated with an organization founded in the UK, but now gone global, called Blood and Honor. But many extreme right organizations would use similar color coding and similar sort of symbols. The second, like I said, are visual symbols, so profile pictures and other types of symbols that are used by people who are active in the extreme right online scene. And of course, common types of these are swastikas and other similar types of symbols of Nazism. The Celtic cross is used very often by the extreme right also. Flags, especially, for example, the Nazi flag, or in the US, the Confederate flag. And these triple parentheses or echoes that you sometimes see and have gotten quite a lot of attention this summer. And people in extreme right circles started to put these around what they conceived of as Jewish names to identify people who they viewed as Jewish people, to harass them, to identify them for harassment online, etc. And then the third type of code are sort of linguistic or numerical codes. What are the purposes? I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about precisely the sort of numerical codes and the visuals that are being used. But just for a moment to ask ourselves, okay, well, what are the purposes of all of these? Well, number one, I would say it's to sort of signal your commitment, right? So it's interesting, if you think about it, what people choose for their profile pictures. Because a lot of the other stuff that you post online, say in Twitter or in messaging apps or etc., right, it's quite ephemeral. It's gone. But people have a tendency to retain their profile pictures sometimes for quite long periods of time. A lot of people, it never occurs to them to change their profile picture, right? So what you choose for your profile picture is obviously something quite important. It says something about you, and so generally you take some time and you think about it. The same goes for your screen name oftentimes. So it's a signal of commitment if you have a profile picture that is Adolf Hitler or Himmler or Göring or etc., right? It also means that it's very easy for other like-minded people to identify you. So you can be identified really quickly by other like-minded people online. It therefore then also allows for community, easy community formation. And then when you're in that community and you're immersed in it, what you can also display by using some of these specific symbols and codes and language, etc., is your in-group knowledge, the way in which you're immersed in this community. You know what it's about, and you use their language. And the jihadis do this in exactly the same way as the extreme right do this, obviously, as do other people. You know, all sort of subcultures have their own language and symbols, etc. But it's just interesting to think about the particular language and symbols of various subgroups. So, in terms of the numeric codes and acronyms, well, you see David Lane's 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children, referred to very often. So 1-4 is used. 8-8 is HH. It means Heil Hitler, obviously. So you see 1488 a lot. It refers to David Lane's 14 words, and it follows it up with a Heil Hitler. WPWW is white pride or white power worldwide. And then we can maybe talk about the Q&A, etc. But a word that's increasingly used in right-wing circles is this word, cook. It's referring to a person, generally a man, being a cuckold. So a quick run through some of the stuff that you can see on social media if you care to have a look in terms of visuals and symbols. So you can see this one here. Guy's referring to Breivik. He's got the Celtic cross going on. He's got the 14 words going on, and then this kind of picture of a skinhead. Here's another one, because we're in Scandinavia, so some of you may have heard the Soldiers of Odin. They were founded relatively recently in Finland. Here's another Defend Europe, what looks like an AK-47, another 1488, so Lane's 14 words, and 88 means Heil Hitler. You can see there, he says, born on April 20th. April 20th is Hitler's birthday. This one again, a lot, as you can see, of sort of neo-Nazi, Nazi type symbolism. So those are, those are SS runes, and this is 1488 again. More Hitler, neo-Nazi, Nazi type of an approach. Again, interesting because we're in Scandinavia. There's a lot of references within extreme right circles to sort of Norse mythology and this kind of thing. And so you see a lot of you see a lot of references to Valhalla. For example, and here again, these are sort of runes, Nordic Viking runes. This is similar, the axe. Again, this is not just on Twitter, obviously, so it's worth pointing out that this content is very widespread across all social media platforms. This content is from Tumblr, and again, you can see a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same code words, a lot of the same type of images. The one thing in just my last few seconds here that I will draw your attention to is what we begin to see here is a lot more images of women. And like I said, there are a lot more women becoming involved in the extreme right-wing online scene at the present time. And this is an interesting kind of a departure. Visitors to Stormfront have been described, as you can see behind me, by Alexa. So they're largely men. And the online scene is pretty much dominated by men. But like I say, a growing role for women. It's interesting because like I said when I started, this is a hyper-masculinist scene. So what they do is they valorize violence and ideas about so-called alpha masculine traits, etc. In terms of their notions or their concepts about women and their role, well, women are seen as bearers of the nation, actually in much the same way as they're seen in jihadi online circles. So this valorization of women as baby makers is shared between these two groups, which is interesting. Women's appearance is also very important in these extreme right circles. And if you look at a lot of the images of women, they're either blonde or they're red-haired, and this is seen to be an ultimate sort of level of sort of whiteness. And finally, I suppose it's interesting that the women who are involved in this scene, they have some notion that you know, these men have baggage, like the quote here says, and they have baggage about women. But these women are still happy enough to stay involved in this scene. So a lot of them, what they seem to want is some kind of equality within this scene, while obviously completely completely seeking to disappear equality for everybody else who isn't within this particular scene. So it's an interesting sort of online milieu that we can see. This is very finally from the Europol's most recent terrorism report, and what they do in that is they underline the way in which there's a lot more of this content that is available right now online. It really is growing all the time. It is really spreading out from more narrow sort of dedicated forums like Stormfront into the more general sort of online public sphere. And that really is a problem, because what they are encouraging people to do is to engage in hate crimes and harassment of people who appear different, etc.
Thank you so much.